All right. It's good to see some familiar names that represent some familiar faces here on the call. And it's good to see you again, Jim. Thank you for joining us. Once again, welcome to Chamber EDU, our Business 101 series. We're actually nearing the end of this series that concludes next week. So it's a little bittersweet, but there's, of course, some great things on tap coming up here in the future. We've got our Green Business Certification classes coming up in April, and then also our HR boot camp also coming up in April. So things are not slowing down. In fact, they're probably speeding up significantly, but it's been great to have those of you who have joined us for this entire series be with us for the duration, and we're going to finish it strong. Really quick, I want to thank some of our partners who have taken an interest in the Chamber EDU program and underwrite our work. And of course, the biggest and best is the College of Business at the University of Nevada, Reno, of which Jim proudly represents. We're so grateful to have them as a partner of the Chamber, but also specifically with this Chamber EDU initiative to bring quality content, information, and expertise to our members. So thank you very much, Jim, and also to Dean Mosier for their support. The Row, NV Energy, BBSI, Prominence Health, they're all key partners with us and have really taken again an interest in seeing our members succeed through this time, and we greatly appreciate it. To close things out, we've got a couple good webinars coming up. Of course, Workplace Mental Health Resources is next week, which I think we can all benefit from, to be completely honest. Creating a competitive advantage through marketing, that's going to be great. It's with the good folks at KPS3. Our webinar last week was fantastic, so I imagine this one will be no different. We've also got a virtual workplace engagement webinar, so how to keep your teams engaged if you're just looking at each other on screens. And that's coming up on April 1st. It is a different date than it was previously. And then capturing the sale through good copywriting. This might be something that not a ton of people are familiar with, but writing good copy, good ad copy, good website copy, whatever it may be, being able to write successful and appealing copy to drive folks to your mission and to your vision is key. And so that's going to be a good one for folks to tune into if they're specifically looking at how to renovate their marketing efforts, how to renovate their websites, their messaging out into the world. That's going to be a good one for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn things over to Jim McClenahan for our very final, it is bittersweet, but our very final seminar on strategic planning on how to track your mission.
Oh, I don't know that it's bittersweet. I think people are kind of excited for it to finally be done.
Well, then I will speak for myself that it's bittersweet for me.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be back with everyone again today. This is part 3 of the strategic planning series. We could have done this in 12 parts. So this today is I shortened it a little bit so we'd have a little more time. If anyone had any questions on anything we've talked about so far, we can kind of go through that today. And I did remember how to tie a tie. I'm very proud of myself. I haven't done that in a long time. That is one of the benefits of the change of the world, that we don't have to do that anymore, really. But, thought it's the last strategic planning session. The least I could do is put on a tie. So I will also try not to pick on Kendall exclusively today, but since we're gonna, through this whole process, we will have a strategic plan written for Ed Alliance.
Why not, Jim? Go for it.
So we've got a plan. We are talking about implementing. We've set some goals. Now we have to manage our plan. And to do that, there's really 5 things that I'll talk about today. First is setting milestones. We are in a strategic plan. You should be biting off a lot. So you need to know, where am I along in this process? So milestones will help you understand how far you've gone and how much more you have to do. I'm going to talk a lot today about risk, mitigating and minimizing risk. Probably because I have a meeting with UNR's risk management department later today. So risk is heavily on my mind. So we'll talk a lot about that. I'm going to talk about creating a dashboard to monitor and report, because monitoring where you are is really important, but you have to make sure you're monitoring the right things. You have to make sure you're incenting the right behaviors. Probably the most important thing is celebrating success, pausing when you've accomplished something to celebrate with your team. Because I can tell you, COVID has done one thing. I've just got off the phone with one of our MBA students who does recruiting in town. Everyone is tired. And so when we accomplish things, we've got to celebrate. It's vital to our mental health. And I see, since that's coming up, dovetails nicely. And then we go back and we reevaluate the plan. And if you were here for that first session I did on the management process, I always talk about resetting expectations, reevaluating the plan. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll start with milestones. Big goals, like I said, are a long process. It's like driving to Idaho to buy a truck, which I did in December. I had no idea what I was biting off to do, but any road trip, you got to know, wow, this looks pretty far, 14 hours. I'm probably going to have to spend the night somewhere. Where am I going to spend the night? Well, okay, well, Boise kind of looks like it's halfway. I'll stay in one of these little towns outside of Boise. And then, oh, I'm probably going to have to spend the night in Idaho where I buy this car. So we get into that mindset when we are doing things personally. Okay, what are my milestones on this process? And even when you're driving for a whole day, you're thinking, okay, where am I going to get lunch? And more importantly, when you get older, where am I going to stop to go to the bathroom? So those kinds of things, those milestones become really important. And you start planning your trip out and celebrating along those milestones. I can tell you, on the ride home, I have never been so happy to get to Winnemucca in my entire life. And the trip from Winnemucca to Reno just seemed forever. That's why milestones are so important. If you look at the academic setting, UNR did not have a spring break this year. We didn't want students to go out, go home, be with their family, potentially infect their family, and then come back here, and then potentially take germs from their family, or go to Florida on spring break or wherever. The problem with that, it's a great idea, is that everyone, their normal pattern is, okay, I should have just had a week off. And instead, we're just in that same grind that we are in. So we didn't get to have that milestone to get out, walk around, take a break, take a breath. We just continue to plow through. That's why at the end of this semester, we are going to celebrate the success of being done, probably more than we ever have, because everyone's just kind of mentally done with all this pandemic stuff. And I'm sure it is that way wherever you are in your organizations. So as you're thinking about your goals, you have to break them up into reasonable, achievable chunks. And the emphasis is really on achievable. I would even tell you, think about ways that you can fail fast, because not every goal is going to be a brilliant idea. I have come up with a ton of terrible ideas. And when I'm going down the path of a terrible idea, what I want to know is, okay, how close is this getting me to where I want to be? And if it's not, I want to be able to stop, reset, pivot, and go the right direction. If your first milestone is, I'm 60% through with this goal or this project, wow, there is no turning back. You are now going to force yourself to finish and maybe not get the result that you wanted. So I would encourage you, when you start with milestones, especially at the start of a goal or any project, make some small bites where you can really assess where you are and where you thought you would be, so you know how to course correct. So I have an example. If you were going to open a sandwich shop to attract more UNR students, you heard that we were going to build a new College of Business building at the corner of Center and 9th Street. We have the land, we just don't have the money. We're about $100 million short. If anyone would like to write a check, talk to me afterwards. Don't tell anyone from UNR I made a joke about that. So let's say you wanted to open up a sandwich shop. You set a goal that 10% of your lunch business should be from UNR students, and that should account for 7% of your total revenue within the next 2 years. Those numbers are totally made up, so don't try to do the math on them. What you might want to do is check 3 months from now or 6 months from now and see where you are. If you think it should be 10% of your lunch business and it's only 1% of your lunch business, okay, how can we course correct? First of all, is this a terrible idea? If it's not a terrible idea, well, maybe we need to do some more marketing. How do we get the word out? How can we engage the UNR community in a different way to achieve that goal? Or is that the wrong goal entirely? Maybe we should be targeting UNR staff, or maybe we should be targeting staff from in town, or maybe we should abandon that and just do delivery. There's all sorts of ways to slice and dice that. But that's why I say, let's not wait 2 years to see how we're doing. Let's start doing temperature checks, 3-month intervals, 6-month intervals, and see where you are to know what you need to do to adjust. Any questions so far?
So far, so good, I think. Let's keep going.
All right, just a quick note on goals. You will hear the term SMART goals thrown out all the time. And, who needs vowels? So I would tell you your goals need to be specific, they need to be measurable, and they need to have a time period associated with them. And this is not just for a strategic plan, this is anything. So in our last exercise, I said 10% of my lunch business. That's a pretty specific goal. And I want it to be 7% of my total revenue. So I have a way to measure how I'm doing on that goal. And I want to do it within the next 2 years. So I have a time period associated with that. Not every goal you ever produce in your life is going to be a SMART goal. Please don't beat yourself up on that. There are some goals that are just squishy, and that's the way they're going to be. But when you can get half of your goals to be SMART goals, then I think you're going to find yourself that your goal setting process and your goal achieving process are going to be much easier. Just as a quick tangent, we do a lot of career services in our office, and when we're advising people on their resumes, we always say, don't just give me a job description. Tell me what you accomplished. Find a way to measure what you have done and be specific about it, so that I know that not just what you did, but how well you did it. And it's kind of the same thing on your goals. Please, no one take that as a sign that you should be changing jobs. But if you do, you work on your resume, that's something you should do. So now, managing risk. This is the hard part. There's really 4 steps. And I thought they were so important, I put bullet points ahead of the numbers. It's great formatting on my part. First, what are the risks? How are you going to identify the risks? You can brainstorm with your team. You can do external researchers. You can hire consultants, but you're going to have to prioritize the risks. What's the likelihood? What's the impact? So in our sandwich shop, one of the risks might be, hey, what if UNR doesn't have students in class? What do we do if that happens? Now, not many people predicted pandemic as one of the risks that they're prioritizing, but that's something that people are going to think about now. What is our alternate way of doing business if there should be a shutdown again? That will be in everyone's risk plan. And then you want to look at the risk from what caused the risk and how could it impact our business. I think I've mentioned before that I'm the board chair for United Federal Credit Union. And so on a weekly basis, we see big commercial loans, and banks are in the risk management business. The way they cover that risk is they charge a different interest rate depending on the risk. We are all in the risk management business. And just to use a United example, they had an incident a couple of weeks ago where the AT&T cut the fiber to their data center, and all of a sudden the data center had to fail over to a backup system. The reason why it was able to fail over to a backup system is that they accounted for that in their risk plan. They assessed, boy, if this AT&T fiber ever went down, we would have an enormous impact. Our business would literally shut down if we didn't have a failover plan. So they identified a risk, they assessed the risk that it would have been a big impact, and then they developed an appropriate response. And the appropriate response is, we're going to pay a certain amount of money a month to have a failover system that we're only ever going to use if that fiber got cut. In California, where there's now, a greater than average number of power outages. Also, I know a lot of people in Texas, people are buying backup generators. Why would you buy a backup generator? Because there's a risk that your power might go out. On certain Ford trucks, there's actually, you can use that to power your house. It can function as a backup generator. So in the Gulf states where they have hurricanes, frequently, and they have these power outages, people are looking at that as a personal risk management solution. So you're trying to find an appropriate response, but you're weighing the cost of that response with the cost of the risk. So if something has a 1 in a million chance of happening, you might not necessarily spend a lot of money to mitigate it or prevent it. If it has a 1 in 100 chance of happening, you might look at spending more money on preventing that risk. So that's the probability. But now we also have to look at the severity. If that 1 in 100 risk created a liability that might be millions of dollars, oh yeah, I think we might have to spend a little bit of money to mitigate that. So we always are looking at what's the impact, we're trying to measure that financially, and what's the probability that that happens. That helps us with our appropriate response. And then it's, how do we develop preventative mechanisms? So if I go back to my United example, they have a testing process that they do periodically to make sure that that failover process works. We have to do the same thing in our businesses. We have to test our plan. Hey, is this actually going to work? Let's cut the power and turn on the generator. Do the lights stay on? That would be great to know that. So we have to have these mechanisms for identifying risks, these contingency plans in place, so that as we're trying to achieve our goals, we're looking at what are the obstacles that could prevent us from achieving that, and how do we manage those obstacles? A couple of sessions ago, I talked about that SWOT analysis, and I know Dean Mosier talked about the SWOT analysis. If I'm looking at managing risk, I have got to know what my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are, because risk is typically an external thing. It's not really an internal thing. So those are things that I really want to be mindful of. So I would ask you, what are the critical risks in your business? Now, everyone is going to say, oh, pandemic, that's a critical risk. You could come up with all employees quit, internet down for a week, power out for 3 days. Landlord raises rent 50%. My product makes people ill. That's usually a bad one if I'm a restaurant. We were hacked. I just read that a Tesla employee prevented a Russian agent from hacking Tesla, which would have potentially crippled the company if that had happened. So cybersecurity is a really, really important area depending on what kind of business that you're in. And the digital security risk is very high depending on what you're doing. So if I'm Kendall, I'm not sure Kendall has any, top secret documents in Ed Alliance, but she certainly has some customer data and some customer information that she's obligated to protect. So that becomes, it's a priority, but it's not going to be hugely expensive. If I'm a bank and I'm sorry, Mike Hicks isn't on, so I can't pick on Mike. Yeah, cybersecurity is a big deal for a bank because they have our money. So we're going to look at, what are the potential costs of all these things happening and how we mitigate this. If I'm in Midtown, I'm probably a little worried that my rent's going to go up in the next couple of years when my lease gets up. So I'm going to try to figure out how can I renegotiate that lease if I want to stay in business longer? What maybe I should be moving around, looking for a different place to run my business out of. The Chamber is a great example of this. They had a great location on California and Virginia, but I mean, it's the gateway to Midtown. And I'm sure when that lease came up, the landlord really wanted to get a nice premium for it. And so the Chamber, Ann is probably not a sharper business person in this town than Ann Silver. So she found another place to run the Chamber out of. And I'm sure it's been great for the Chamber. So those are the types of things that you want to be mindful of. The time to be mindful of your rent going up is not a month before your lease gets renegotiated. Those are the things you want to look at years before. And most landlords, they want to negotiate with you. They don't want to have to go find new tenants, especially if you're a good tenant. So brainstorm with your teams, what are the critical risks in your business? And you should probably have a risk plan to avoid those risks. As you're looking at your goals in your strategic plan, how do those risks align with your goals? Do you have certain goals that you're trying to achieve that have inherent risks in them that you might have to deal with? That's really what we're looking for in our strategic plan. Remember, in the last session I said, when we're looking at revenue forecasts, we're really placing bets. When we're placing bets, we're managing risk. That's what this is all about. So as you place your bets on, where are my sources of revenue coming from, you always have to be mindful of the risk that you are also managing on that, because we all want to win our bets. So how do we know how we're doing? Dashboards are a great tool. And a dashboard could be nothing more than an Excel spreadsheet I look at. It could be a chart that someone prepares for me. What you need to know are what are your key performance indicators that are driving your goals. And you probably have some of these key performance indicators in your businesses right now. The number one key performance indicator that some people are always reluctant to say, but I always say it, would be cash in the bank. And I have a story about cash in the bank that I'll tell you on the next slide. I always like to make sure, do I have enough money to pay the bills? But your KPIs can be almost anything. I would think about, where are my customers coming from? How do I slice my customers into target demographics or target audiences? And then what percentage of my revenue is from those customers? So maybe there's a segment that I am placing a bet on. I'm going to want to have a way to measure how I'm doing targeting revenue from that particular customer group. So that gets back to measurement, and it can be kind of hard to measure things. So a common thing that you might see on your dashboard, if you're in a business that uses that has like a call center, what's my time to answer a call? How many times am I handling that on a first resolution? If you have customer service metrics, how are you measuring your customer service? If you have specific goals in your strategic plan that are revenue-based, how are you measuring that revenue? If they're implementing a new product or service, how are you measuring your progress on that implementation? You need a quick way to show yourself this, because if you have to dig around for this information, you're not going to look at it on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So if I'm working my strategic plan, probably on a monthly basis, I want a quick look to see how am I doing on it. I'm not saying you go through the whole plan on a monthly basis, but if I'm in a board of directors meeting, I want to take a quick look at what are the key drivers of my business, the key drivers of my strategic initiatives, and make sure I'm on track. I'm hitting my milestones. And if I'm not, then I know in that meeting, okay, we need to schedule some time to go through this. So these tell me when I'm not at my milestone, and it might be a call to action. Now, I always say, be careful with incentives. And I'll throw it on here with dashboards, because if you are offering bonuses for things, you will get what you pay for. If I am trying to grow sales, if I'm trying to increase the number of customers I have, that is so easy to do. I just have to sell products to everyone under my cost. I can just make them cheap as possible. I can get lots and lots of new customers. They won't stay when they actually pay the price that they're supposed to pay, and I'll go bankrupt because how did I sell more and then go out of business? Well, because I wasn't selling correctly, because I was paying a bonus on sales. Now, there may be times that you want to tweak that, but you have to be careful how you manage that. If you're on boards, you're usually managing a CEO. And CEO compensation can be a little bit different. If you're bonusing that CEO on net income, well, it's easy to get net income. I shouldn't say it's easy. You can get net income today by compromising tomorrow. That's not hard to do. And so if you're bonusing or providing an incentive for net income, well, you have to always be looking at, well, what's going on in year 2 and year 3 and year 4? Are we sacrificing performance there to get performance now? And if you look at the stock market, that's a frequent criticism of the stock market, that companies, it's hard for them to think long term, because if I want to put a lot of money into research and development, I'm not going to have positive quarters. Well, then the market's going to punish my stock price. And companies don't like to have their stock price punished. So you have to be really careful with how you incent performance, and your dashboard will help you do that. So celebrate successes. When the Sparks Chamber and Reno Chamber merged, and I was the treasurer, and we kind of figured everything out, we looked in the bank account, looked at cash, and I want to say it was 45 days of cash we had in the bank. And Len Stevens and I don't want to say we panicked. I got in a cold sweat. Len Stevens immediately went out and signed up 10 more members, because he could do that kind of thing. And my goal on the board was 6 months of operating cash in the bank. And I think it was Len had already moved on and had been CEO for a while, and I was on the board as liaison from UNR, got the financial report and looked at the cash in the bank. And it was 6 months of cash. This was probably over 7 years. I almost cried. I was so happy that we finally made it to 6 months of cash in the bank. And that's a number of years ago. And I'm not trying to reveal secrets about the Chamber's financial position. But if you're looking for a nice benchmark for you, 6 months of operating cash is always a nice benchmark for any nonprofit organization. For any for-profit organization, it really depends on your business. But when I saw that, I was so grateful to the Chamber staff and to Ann for making that happen. And I called Len Stevens and told him it had happened. I was so excited. because we put a lot of work into these organizations as board members, as employees, as leaders. Take time to celebrate when you finally achieve it. And even if you're not part of it anymore, you got to be happy, because we're all putting our blood, sweat, and tears into this. And you know, if I heard, if Kristine gave me a positive membership report on the chamber, I haven't been on the board in 3 or 4 years, I would be thrilled, because I want organizations like the chamber to do well. The same with Ed Alliance. Anytime Kendall reports something great with her grants, that's fantastic, because it helps our community. I want to be there to celebrate that with her, because I just think it's amazing. So I always give her a thumbs up or a good job when I see it on social media. We should be excited about things like that in our community because, and I've said this before, the rising tide floats all boats. So the last thing is reevaluate the plan. Review everything quarterly, check it out with your team. What needs to be adjusted? Where are we off on the milestones? What was right? What was wrong? This is not huge. It's not major. It's just a check-in. We have the dashboard. We're looking at that every month. Every quarter, we're just going to pull that plan off the shelf and make sure we're still moving to plan. Is there something that we can change? Are we still on the right path? Did something major happen that we need to reevaluate, redo our plan? It's okay to do that. But don't just do your plan and stick it on a shelf and then forget about it. Go back and reevaluate it. If the goals were valid then, are the goals valid now? And get people excited, because this is supposed to be fun. I read that somewhere. If people are excited, they're less likely to quit and, you know, stay through things like pandemics. So a couple things we haven't talked about, and then I'll be done. Strategic planning is a huge subject. You got to understand your stakeholders and stakeholder mapping. Who are you really serving? Who are your stakeholders? It's not just the people that buy from you. So we could do a whole class on that. Aligning budgets to strategy. We have not talked at all about how much this stuff costs and how to pay for it, but how do we make our budgets align with our strategy? How do we align HR and other departments? If you want a successful strategic plan, human resources is probably your most important department. We didn't really talk about risk planning and get deep into that. There's a lot to that. And strategic communication, how we communicate internally, how we communicate externally to our stakeholders. That's another huge area that we haven't talked about. So there's a lot to this, but I think you got the basics. I know I said I'd be short and I went long. So Kendall got me rolling. What can I say?
Thank you so much, Jim. And you know, you've speaking of blood, sweat, and tears, you've definitely poured all of those things. Well, hopefully not tears, but you've definitely poured a tremendous amount of work into this series for us. And I thank you. I thank you on behalf of the chamber, on behalf of our members, for advocating for us and for serving us in this way. Let me go ahead and open it up to questions. What questions does everyone have for Jim?
Well, I'll go. I just want to thank you, Jim, for just highlighting so many things. You know, it's funny because Melissa Dedman is my vice president and she's on this board as well. She's with TMCC, a brainiac person who's so smart and on here to learn, because we are in the strategic planning process and we're doing all this stuff. You know, I know when we walk through all this, we're doing all this, but we have to put some structure around it. So this whole series has helped me, and I know Melissa has said so too. And I guess we get so busy because we have such a lean team that sometimes we don't realize we're doing it, and all it is putting a little structure around it. And I always believe in, my favorite part is celebrating that success. It's amazing how far an organization can go when you celebrate even the smallest successes, even if it's a new success that you never dreamed you would be celebrating, you know, especially after this past year. So thank you.
I just think that goes to building a great culture in your company, and that's not really strategic planning, but if I'm planning strategy, I really need to be thinking about culture, because cultural change is really, really hard. Michael Porter, who's kind of the guru of strategy in the world, said culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you know, if you got a bad culture, there is no strategic plan that will save your company.
Good to know. And also I would love your reading list. That'd be a great follow-up.
Oh, I can give you a lot to read, that's for sure.
I'll start with the strategic planning for dummies.
Start with strategic planning for dummies, and then read The Leadership Challenge by James Kouzes, Kouzes, and Barry Posner, Posner. It's one of the best leadership books out there. It's very tactical, very practical. It's not as much theory, but if you manage people and you develop people, if that's what you do for a living, that's to me, that's the Bible.
Great, thank you for those resources. I have a quick question that is born from your past sessions, actually, Jim, and it's more just a curiosity than a real pertinent question. But you know, both you and Dean Mosier referenced the SWOT analysis and commented that it was that you considered it to be perhaps antiquated, and so I'm curious, you know, why the SWOT analysis may carry that reputation, and what other analyses out there, you know, can be used in lieu of SWOT analysis if someone has a preference.
So there's a lot of consulting companies out there that get paid a lot of money, like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Accenture, to come up with these new models of how they evaluate opportunities, how they evaluate risk. And SWOT it's just been around for a long time. So old doesn't necessarily mean bad. Dean Mosier, he was the one that said it was antiquated. If it's antiquated, I use it almost every time I'm doing anything strategically or evaluating new opportunities, because it's just a good way to force me to pump the brakes and, okay, well, what's out there that might derail this? And what am I not seeing? What are my blind spots? So when I'm doing strategic planning, it's always, what are the blind spots? Because there's stuff out there that I know this section really well, but what am I not? What's outside my field of vision? I just think the SWOT makes you do that. So, and it's not, you don't have to have a PhD to understand it. It just makes sense to people who are in a business environment. You know, I should be able to articulate what my strengths and weaknesses are. The opportunities and threats externally are a little bit harder. So it's older. I mean, it's probably been around since the 50s. But that, I don't think that implies it's not as effective, but it's certainly not one of the shiny new tools. You're not going to read a Harvard Business Review article about this fancy new SWOT analysis, but you might read an article that says, hey, this is a technique that's been around for a while. You should still use it.
Right. A good tool is a good tool, whether it's old or it's new. So thank you for clarifying that. It was mostly just a curiosity that I'd had because I hadn't heard about any alternatives, honestly, to the SWOT analysis. So I was quite curious about that.
Oh, there's 9 cell analysis. There's all sorts of ways that you can strategically look at goals and issues around revenue.
Awesome. All righty. What other questions do we have out there? All right, Jim, you just did such a great job. Everyone is speechless. All right. Well, thank you. And also thank you. I don't think I mentioned this previously to anyone on the call, but Jim was gracious enough to send the slide deck for both of the last 2 presentations. So I'll go ahead and send that to everyone after the call at some point today. So that will be available for you to reference moving forward. I know for Kendall and Melissa and myself, it's been incredibly helpful to have those notes to reference as we're digging through our strategic plan. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, for sticking it through. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you at the last 4 or 5 sessions of Chamber EDU in the next week.
It was excellent, Kristine. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you soon.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Appreciate it.